The Galactic Academy floated between the stars like a giant crystal palace in the darkness of space, and students from hundreds of different worlds came here to learn together and study peace and science and the ways of getting along with each other. But for Maya Torres, the only human student in her entire class, peace felt like something that would never happen for her, because every single day was filled with whispers and mean looks and cruel words that cut deeper than any knife could ever cut. Silvara was the worst of them all, and she was an elf woman with long silver hair that looked like moonlight falling down her back, and her eyes were a strange violet color that seemed to glow when she looked at Maya with that special kind of disgust that only came from someone who truly believed they were better than you. And right now those violet eyes were fixed on Maya as she whispered to her friends in that musical voice that elves were so famous for. The elf said that the Death Worlder was trying to read again, and she wondered out loud if Maya could even understand the words on the page, or if she just saw everything as either something to hunt or something that might hunt her. And the other students around Silvara started to giggle behind their delicate hands like this was the funniest joke they had ever heard in their entire lives. Maya kept her eyes down on her datapad, and she clenched her jaw tight because she had learned that fighting back only made things worse. And the elves thought they were the best species in the whole galaxy, because their civilization was 50,000 years old, and they had art and music and culture that other species could only dream about. And humans were newcomers who had only been in space for 300 years, and Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, which was a rating that made most aliens feel sick just thinking about it. 3 months had passed since Maya arrived at the academy, and every single day was exactly the same, with the whispers and the stares and the way other students would move their seats away from her in the cafeteria, like she carried some kind of disease, and she was stronger than any elf and faster than most of the other students. But here at the academy, that just made her seem more like a monster instead of a person. Another student named Kesh, who was made of living crystal, spoke up and said that humans had evolved from something called persistence predators, and he explained that humans would chase their prey for days and days without stopping until the poor animal just collapsed from being too tired to run anymore. And Kesh said this like it was the most horrible thing he could imagine. Silvara stroked the small creature that was wrapped around her shoulders, and she said that such behavior was barbaric and completely primitive. And the creature was a dragon named Ember, and he was no bigger than a house cat, with scales that shined bright red in the light. And dragons and elves had been bonded partners for thousands and thousands of years, and most people in the galaxy thought this bond was the most sacred and special relationship that existed anywhere. The little dragon named Ember raised his head and looked at Maya with golden eyes that seemed to see right through her, and she felt a strange prickling sensation on her skin, like the dragon could sense things that others could not sense. And Maya wanted to tell them all that persistence hunting required, intelligence and strategy and endurance beyond what any of them had. But she had learned months ago that defending herself only brought more mockery and more cruelty. Professor Vintar glided into the classroom on his anti-gravity platform, and he was an elderly being from the Centauri Collective, and his body communicated through chemical signals that a translator device turned into words that everyone could understand. And he asked for attention and said he had an exciting announcement that would interest all of them. The professor explained that their class had been approved for an educational expedition to observe a death world ecosystem firsthand, and he said they would have the chance to study survival adaptations in their natural environment, and the students started whispering excitedly because field trips were rare and special, and everyone wanted to go on adventures to new places. Then Professor Vintar said the destination was Earth, and the entire room went completely silent, and every single eye in the classroom turned to look at Maya, and she felt her face get hot and her stomach twisted into knots because she knew exactly what was coming next. Silvara made a face of pure disgust, and she said they were being sent to the human homeworld, and she said this was not educational, but suicidal, and that no one could possibly learn anything useful from such a dangerous trip. And several other students nodded their heads in agreement with her. The professor remained calm, and he explained that Earth had more different types of life than any 10 garden worlds combined, and its ecosystems had survived 5 mass extinction events and countless climate changes, and there was so much to learn from a world that refused to let anything die easily. Kesh protested and said that nearly everything on Earth was venomous or toxic or evolved specifically to kill other things. And he said he had read the reports about Earth, and they terrified him just reading them, and he could not imagine actually going there in person. Professor Vintar assured them that appropriate safety measures would be taken, and then he said that Maya Torres would serve as their guide, because her family maintained a nature preserve in a place that used to be called Colorado. And Maya felt her heart sink down into her shoes because she knew this meant a whole week of her classmates being terrified of butterflies and clouds and every little thing that moved. It meant more mockery and more proof that she came from a world of nightmares and horrors, and she would never be seen as normal or acceptable, no matter how hard she tried to fit in with them. But as Maya looked up from her desk, she caught Silvara staring at her with an expression that was different from the usual disgust, and the elf woman looked curious and calculating, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle that did not make sense, and her violet eyes were sharp and focused in a way Maya had never seen before. Ember. The little dragon raised his head higher and made a soft hissing sound, and his golden eyes were locked onto Maya with an intensity that made her skin prickle again, and people said that dragons could sense things that others missed. And they could see truths that were hidden beneath the surface, and they could recognize potential that was waiting to be unlocked and released. Maya had absolutely no idea that this field trip would completely destroy every assumption that her classmates held about humans and death worlds, and she did not know that the mountains of Colorado would turn into a battlefield, or that she would end up making an alliance with the very person who hated her more than anyone else in the entire academy. She had no idea that Earth was preparing to teach them all a lesson about what survival truly meant, and what it cost, and what it gave to those who were strong enough to embrace it instead of running away from it. The class continued, but Maya could not focus on anything the professor said because her mind was spinning with worry about the trip, and about spending a whole week watching her classmates flinch away from squirrels and scream at the sight of rain, and she wondered if this would make things better or so much worse. Silvara kept glancing at her throughout the rest of the lesson, and Ember kept staring with those knowing golden eyes, and Maya felt like something big was coming, and she was not ready for it at all. But ready or not, the field trip was happening, and Earth was waiting to show these sheltered students what a real world looked like when it refused to be tamed or controlled or made safe. The transport shuttle came down through the atmosphere of Earth, and all the students pressed their faces against the windows with expressions that mixed fascination and pure terror. And Maya watched their reactions with a feeling that was bitter and almost funny, because they looked at her homeworld like it was some kind of nightmare come to life, instead of the beautiful place she had grown up loving. Lyra was a gentle water creature who lived inside a special tank filled with liquid, and she whispered that the cloud formations looked so violent and angry, and she asked how anything could possibly survive under skies that moved and churned like that, and her voice trembled with fear. Even though they were still safe inside the shuttle, Kesh checked his environmental suit readings for the third time in just 5 minutes, and he said the atmospheric pressure was crushing, and the oxygen content was like breathing fire, and he kept adjusting the controls on his suit like he thought they might be broken or giving him wrong information. Silvara said nothing at all, but her knuckles were white from gripping her seat so hard, and Maya noticed that Ember had grown strangely still and quiet, and the little dragon was usually playful and active, but now he just stared at the world below them with an alert and almost reverent posture, and a low thrumming sound came from his chest that Maya had never heard any dragon make before. The shuttle touched down at the Torres family preserve, which was a huge area of protected wilderness in the Rocky Mountains, and 2 women were waiting at the landing pad, and both of them were grinning broadly, and Maya felt her heart lift because she had missed her mother so much during her time. At the academy, Dr. Lisa Torres called out a welcome to Earth as the students came down the ramp, and most of them were wearing full environmental suits, even though the spring weather was mild and perfect, and Lisa introduced herself as Maya's mom and said that Kate Morrison was her wife, and they were both excited to show everyone around their preserve. Kate was tall and weathered from spending decades working outdoors, and she laughed at how cautiously the students were moving, and she said they had cleared the immediate area, and there were no bears or mountain lions or rattlesnakes within 100 meters, and she was trying to be reassuring, but several students actually froze in place when she mentioned predators. So casually, Silvara muttered that Kate was joking about it being safe, and she helped Kesh adjust his suit controls while saying that this whole trip was madness, and they were all going to die, and Maya felt a flash of anger, because her home was not some death trap, even if it was more dangerous than the soft garden worlds these students came from. Professor Vintar floated forward on his platform, and his sensors were drinking in everything about the environment, and he said the electromagnetic readings were fascinating and the mineral content in the soil was remarkable, and the sheer abundance of microbial life was beyond anything he had expected to find. Maya felt a small surge of pride rising in her chest, because whatever else Earth might be, it was hers, and it was beautiful. And the morning sun was painting the mountain peaks gold, and the scent of pine trees and wildflowers filled the air, and she had missed this smell more than she had realized during her months in space. Lisa announced they would start with a gentle hike of just a few kilometers through a meadow ecosystem, and she promised nothing dangerous would happen, and they would stay on well-maintained trails the whole time. But the students still looked nervous and uncertain. The hike turned into a complete disaster within the first 20 minutes, and a deer bounded across the path in front of them, and half the class actually dove for cover, like the deer was some kind of monster. And when a blue jay called from a nearby branch, Lyra nearly cracked her tank because she panicked so badly. Silvara maintained her composure better than most of the other students, but Maya noticed that the elf woman kept her hand close to the emergency beacon on her belt at all times, and she was ready to call for rescue at the first sign of real danger. Only Ember seemed happy instead of terrified, and the little dragon had taken wing and was soaring in loops around the group, and his movements were more confident and powerful than Maya had ever seen before, and he kept diving down toward interesting rocks and plants and insects and examining everything with intense focus that showed real intelligence. Maya found herself walking near Silvara during a rest stop, and she commented that the dragon seemed quite taken with Earth, and she tried to keep her voice neutral and not mocking. Silvara glanced at Ember with an expression that was softer than usual, and she said he was acting strange, and explained that dragons had ancestral memories that were passed down through their bonding. And somehow Ember seemed to recognize this place even though he had never been here before, and she said he had never been this energetic or alive, and there was confusion and reluctance in her voice. Before Maya could respond, Kate's voice crackled over their communication units, and she said there was a situation developing, and a storm was rolling in fast, and it was a serious one, and they needed to get everyone to the shelter immediately, and her tone left no room for argument or questions. Maya looked at the western horizon and felt her stomach drop like a stone, because a wall of black clouds was racing toward them, and lightning was flickering inside the darkness like angry snakes. And she knew that formation, and she knew what it meant, and she said they had a supercell coming and everyone needed to move right now. Kesh said nervously that it was just weather, and they had environmental suits that would protect them, and he did not understand why everyone was so worried about some clouds and rain. Maya snapped at him, and her voice took on a tone of command that surprised everyone, including herself, and she said the suits would not save them if they got caught in the open, and the storm had winds that could throw them into a cliff face and hail that could crack their helmets wide open, and she told them to move immediately. Something in her voice made them obey without further argument, and maybe it was the absolute certainty that came from growing up on a death world where weather could kill you if you were not careful. And the students hurried down the trail with Maya and Silvara bringing up the rear to make sure no one fell behind. Then Ember shrieked, and it was a sound of fear and distress, and Maya watched in horror as the little dragon got caught in the leading edge of the storm, because he had flown too far ahead, and the wind was tossing him around like a leaf, and his wings could not find purchase in the chaotic air currents that were spinning and twisting. Silvera's composed mask completely shattered, and she screamed her dragon's name and started to run toward him. But the wind hit her like a physical blow and knocked her backward, and she would have tumbled over the edge of the trail if Maya had not been there. Maya did not think or plan, and she just lunged forward and caught the elf woman before she could fall, and with her other arm she reached up and somehow impossibly snatched Ember from the air as the wind threw him past them, and it was pure instinct and Deathworlder reflexes that let her do it. The dragon's claws dug into her forearm and drew blood, but she held tight as she pulled both dragon and elf back from the edge, and lightning struck a tree only 20 meters away, and the thunder was so loud it felt like being inside a drum that someone was beating. Maya shouted over the roar of the storm that the shelter was just ahead, and she told Silvara to hold onto her, and she wrapped one arm around the elf woman's waist and ran, using her death worlder strength and endurance to fight against wind that would have sent any garden worlder tumbling away like a piece of paper. Ember clung to her shoulder and pressed his small body against her neck, and she could feel him trembling. But he trusted her to keep him safe, and they made it to the emergency shelter just as the hail began and ice chunks the size of her fist were hammering the ground where they had been standing just moments before. Kate slammed the reinforced door shut, and the sounds of the storm became muted and distant, and the students huddled together, and some were crying, and most were in shock because they had never experienced weather as a threat before, and their worlds had tamed nature so long ago that they forgot it could be dangerous. Silvara slowly pulled away from Maya, and her violet eyes were wide with shock and disbelief, and she looked down at Maya's bleeding arm where Ember's claws had torn through the sleeve, and the wounds were not deep, but blood was running down to her hand. The elf woman whispered that Maya had saved them and saved Ember, and her voice was small and confused, like she could not understand why a human would risk herself for an elf who had been cruel to her for months. Maya shrugged and tried to ignore the way her heart was pounding in her chest, and she said it was just a storm, and surely Silvara would have done the same thing if their positions had been reversed. Silvara said no very quietly, and for the first time since they had met, there was no mockery or disgust in her voice, and she said she would not have done the same because she could not have done it. And she was not strong enough or fast enough or brave enough. Ember chirped softly and pressed his snout against Maya's cheek, and it was a gesture of trust and affection that left Silvara staring in complete astonishment, because dragons did not show affection to anyone except their bonded partners, and yet here was Ember treating Maya like she was someone precious and worth protecting. Outside the shelter, the storm continued to rage with wind, and the storm passed after 2 hours of waiting in the shelter, and when they emerged, the world looked washed clean and glittering with water droplets that caught the sunlight like millions of tiny diamonds, and the students pressed against the viewports, watching as the landscape transformed from something terrifying into something almost magical. Professor Vintar's sensors were working overtime, and he said it was remarkable how the ecosystem was already recovering, and he pointed out insects emerging from their hiding places and birds resuming their activities. And the resilience was astounding to someone who came from a world where nothing ever threatened the delicate balance of nature. Lisa and Kate were checking everyone for injuries when Kate's radio crackled with a voice that Maya did not recognize, and she watched her mom's expression go hard and cold in a way that meant serious trouble was coming, and Kate told everyone to get back to the lodge immediately, and her tone left absolutely no room for questions or arguments. Professor Vintar asked what was wrong, and his sensors were picking up the tension in the air, even though he could not read human facial expressions very well. Kate said the word poachers with a grimness that made Maya's blood turn to ice, and she explained that they had been having problems with criminals lately, and these people were trying to steal genetic samples and exotic specimens, and the storm had probably provided cover for them to breach the preserved security perimeter. Maya felt ice forming in her veins because poachers on Earth were not like thieves on garden worlds, and they were armed with illegal weapons and often enhanced with military-grade augmentations. And now, because of the field trip, the preserve was full of vulnerable alien students who would be worth absolute fortunes on the black market. The attack came just minutes later before they could reach the safety of the lodge, and 3 armed figures materialized from the tree line wearing active camouflage that made them almost invisible, and they had weapons raised and ready. But Maya noticed immediately that the guns were not pointed at the humans, but at the students instead. The lead poacher shouted for nobody to move and said they were taking the aliens, and if everyone cooperated, then nobody would get hurt. And his voice had the flat, emotionless quality of someone who had done this kind of thing many times before. Maya's mind was racing through possibilities, and she knew that Kate was armed but badly outnumbered, and Lisa had no weapons at all, and the students were frozen in terror, and Professor Vintar's floating platform had no defensive capabilities whatsoever. Then Silvara did something that was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid at the same time, and she stepped forward and placed herself between the poachers and the younger students who were huddled together in fear. The elf woman said they would have to go through her first, and her voice was steady, even though Maya could see her hands shaking, and it was the first truly courageous thing Maya had ever seen Silvara do. The lead poacher laughed, and it was not a nice sound. and he said that Silvara was worth more than all the other students combined because elven genetic material would make the corporations pay millions of credits, and he raised his weapon and pointed it directly at her chest. Maya moved without thinking, and she had spent her whole life being told she was too aggressive and too strong and too dangerous. But every instinct that her death world had bred into her species suddenly had a purpose and a reason to exist. She covered the distance between herself and the lead poacher before he could react, and she used the combat training that all Earth children learned in school, because you never knew when you might need to defend yourself, and her movements were fast and precise. The weapon discharged, but she had already knocked it aside, and the shot went wide and hit a tree trunk instead of a person, and her elbow struck the poacher's throat with controlled force. And it was not hard enough to kill him, but it was enough to take him completely out of the fight. She spun and used his body as a shield as the second poacher fired, and Kate had drawn her own weapon now, and Lisa was herding students toward whatever cover she could find. But the third poacher was circling around, trying to flank them and get a clear shot at the vulnerable aliens. That was when Ember proved that dragons, even small ones, were not pets or decorations or cute companions. And the little dragon launched himself from Silvara's shoulder with a shriek that sounded like metal being torn apart. He had grown during their time on Earth, and Maya realized this now as she watched him move. And it was not just physical growth, but something deeper and more fundamental. And he moved with confidence and ferocity that had not been there before. His ancestors had been apex predators once before elves had domesticated them and turned them into companions over thousands of years. But here on Earth, that ancient heritage was waking up and remembering what it meant to be a true dragon. Ember struck the third poacher's face with claws extended, and the man stumbled backward, firing wildly. But the dragon was too fast and too agile, and he moved like lightning, like the ancient raptors that had once hunted in Earth's skies, and his fire erupted in a genuine gout of flame that melted the poacher's weapon into useless slag. The dragon had grown, Maya realized with shock, and it was not just in spirit but in actual physical size. And he was nearly twice as large as he had been that morning, and his scales were brighter, and his movements were more powerful and more deadly. Silvara called her dragon's name, and Ember returned to her immediately and took up a protective stance in front of his bonded partner, and his wings were spread wide and his teeth were bared, and he looked magnificent and terrifying. Kate had subdued the second poacher with efficient movements, and Maya had the lead poacher pinned to the ground with her knee in his back, and the third poacher, with his helmet half melted and his face burned, was trying to crawl away, but he was not going anywhere. Kate ordered him not to move, and her weapon was steady and professional, and she said that preserve security teams were 2 minutes out, and they would be taken into custody and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The crisis was over as quickly as it had begun, but its impact was just starting to spread through the group, and the students had watched Maya fight, and they had seen what a human could really do when protecting others, and they had witnessed her speed and her strength and her absolute refusal to let harm come to people she barely knew. And they had seen Ember transform into something magnificent and terrible, and awakened by the world that had birthed the deadliest predators in the known galaxy, and the dragon that had been small and decorative was now powerful and proud. Lyra approached Maya cautiously as security teams arrived to take the poachers away, and she said that Maya had moved so fast and she had never seen anyone move that fast in her entire life. Maya was catching her breath, and she said quietly that humans were pursuit predators and everyone knew that. But what they did not know was that humans were also pack animals, and pack animals protected their own, no matter what the cost. Kesh asked softly if they were Maya's pack, and his crystalline voice had a note of wonder in it, like he could not quite believe what he was asking. Maya met his eyes, and she said they were her classmates, and that was close enough for her, and she would protect her classmates the same way she would protect her family. Silvara approached then, with Ember riding on her shoulder, and the dragon had shrunk back to near his original size, but something fundamental had changed in him, and his eyes held intelligence and pride that Maya recognized as the look of a creature that had remembered what it was truly meant to be. The elf woman said, "Thank you." And the words seemed to cost her something, and she said she owed Maya an apology, and actually several apologies, because they had treated her abominably. And Maya had responded by protecting them at risk, to her own life. Maya said simply that Silvara was welcome, and she did not need thanks for doing what was right. Silvara asked a question that had clearly been bothering her, and she gestured at the scene around them with the storm damage and the subdued poachers and the wild landscape, and she asked how humans could possibly live like this, where every moment was danger, and the weather wanted to kill them, and the wildlife wanted to kill them, and even other humans wanted to kill them. Maya looked around at her homeworld, and at the mountains that had shaped her people, and at the sky that was already clearing to brilliant blue, and she said that humans functioned because they did not have a choice, and Earth did not give anyone the option of being weak or afraid forever. She explained that on Earth, you either adapted and grew stronger, or you died, but what everyone was missing was that it was not just about the danger, and she pointed to where a deer had emerged from the forest and was cautiously approaching a stream that had been swollen by the storm. Maya said that the deer had survived the same storm they did, and so had every tree and every bird and every insect, and life here did not just endure, but actually thrived, and humans had learned to not just survive Earth, but to love it and protect it. Silvara followed Maya's gaze, and something shifted in her expression, and for the first time she seemed to see Earth not as a nightmare, but as a crucible that had forged something extraordinary out of the raw materials of struggle and danger. The elf woman said quietly that they would be staying longer than planned because of security protocols after the attack, and Maya confirmed that it would probably be another week. The next 3 days transformed everything in ways that none of them could have predicted, and with additional security deployed around the preserve and the students unable to leave because of safety protocols, Kate and Lisa turned the extended stay into an immersive education experience that would change how the aliens saw Earth forever. Maya found herself in the unexpected role of teacher, and she was showing her classmates the intricacies of her homeworld. And to her surprise, they were genuinely trying to learn instead of just mocking everything they saw, and it felt strange and wonderful at the same time. She explained on the second morning while leading a group through a forest trail that the key to understanding Earth was realizing that everything here existed in balance, and yes, there were predators, but there were also defenses, and yes, the weather was dangerous. But life had adapted to use that danger as a tool for survival. She pointed to a thick, barked pine tree and explained that the bark was fireproof, and forest fires that would destroy most garden world vegetation actually helped these trees by clearing competition and releasing their seeds so they could grow. Lara extended a tentacle from her mobility tank and gently touched the bark, and she said that life which needed destruction in order to propagate was actually beautiful in a way she had never considered before. Silvara had been Maya's constant companion since the attack, and the elf woman's curiosity had apparently been awakened by the crisis they had survived together, and Ember too had bonded to Maya in a way that clearly confused his elven partner. The elf woman admitted as they watched the dragon play hunting butterflies that Ember had never been this affectionate with anyone except her, and dragons bonded to one person for life. And yet on Earth it was like he had found a second home, or remembered something he had forgotten. Maya suggested carefully that maybe it was because Earth reminded Ember of what dragons used to be before they became domesticated and turned into companions instead of the apex predators they had once been. Silvara stiffened at first, but then slowly nodded, and she said that elven ancestors had not actually domesticated dragons but had partnered with them after they were already diminished, and the great dragon lords of legend had gone extinct thousands of years before elves achieved spaceflight, and they had only ever known small dragons. Maya asked what if the dragons were not really extinct, but just needed the right environment to remember what they truly were. And she gestured to Ember, who had successfully caught a dragonfly and was examining it with obvious delight and intelligence. That afternoon, Kate took them to a bear observation area, and the students watched from a safe platform as a massive grizzly bear fished in a stream below them, and the bear was graceful despite its size. Kate explained that the animal weighed 300 kilograms and could run 55 kilometers per hour and climb trees and had a bite force of 1,200 pounds per square inch, and it was also intelligent and curious, and mostly peaceful, unless it was threatened or protecting. Cubskesh asked in wonder how humans could possibly live alongside such creatures and not be in constant fear for their lives. Kate said the answer was respect, and she explained that humans respected the bear's space and needs and right to exist. And yes, sometimes humans got hurt, but the solution was not to eliminate everything dangerous but to learn to coexist with nature. That evening, they sat around a carefully controlled fire under Lisa's supervision, and the students began sharing stories from their own worlds. But the tone had shifted completely, and they were not boasting about their civilizations being superior anymore. Lyra said softly that her homeworld was beautiful, but nothing there had ever challenged her, and they had eliminated danger so long ago that they had also eliminated growth and opportunity. Silvara added while staring into the flames that elven worlds were gardens, and they were perfect and pristine and unchanging, and they had spent 50,000 years making everything safe and predictable. And she looked at Maya and said she thought they had been calling humans primitive, but maybe elves were the ones who had stopped evolving. Maya said that elves were not primitive but just different, and their worlds had taught them different lessons about life and survival. Silvara said quietly that maybe those were not the lessons they needed to learn, and Professor Vintar spoke up and said he had been reviewing Earth's history, including the climate wars and the unification and the rebuilding, and he said that humanity had faced extinction-level threats and adapted, instead of dying. The professor said that humans had not made their world safer but had made themselves stronger, and that was a fundamental difference in philosophy. Maya said they had not had a choice about it, and Earth did not give options. Silvara said quietly that humans could have destroyed themselves, but instead they built something extraordinary, and they kept the danger and the challenge, but learned to face it together as one species. On the fourth day, everything changed again, and they were hiking near a mountain lake when Ember suddenly grew alert, and his head swiveled toward the tree line, and a low growl echoed from the shadows, and Maya's blood ran cold because she recognized that sound. She said quietly for everyone to stay calm and back away slowly because there was a mountain lion nearby, and her voice was steady but urgent. The big cat emerged from the undergrowth, and it was lean and powerful and beautiful. But something was terribly wrong because its movements were jerky and foam flecked its jaws, and Maya knew immediately what that meant. Kate breathed the word rabies from her position at the rear of the group, and her weapon was already drawn, and she said that nobody should run because running would trigger the chase instinct, and they needed to stay calm. The mountain lion's eyes were wild and unfocused, and the disease had destroyed its natural caution and turned it into something purely dangerous with no rational thought left. And it began stalking toward Lyra, whose mobility tank made her the slowest target and therefore the easiest prey. Kate raised her weapon to take the shot, and Silvara did, something that was incredibly brave. And she stepped forward and placed herself between the rabid cat and Lyra, and she was protecting someone weaker than herself. Maya started forward, but the elf woman raised a hand to stop her, and Silvara said, she understood now, and Earth taught through challenge, and this was their test, and they had to prove they had learned the lessons. The mountain lion tensed its muscles to spring forward, and Ember struck with devastating speed and precision, and the little dragon had been growing steadily over their days on Earth, and now he exploded into motion with power that shocked everyone who was watching. He had nearly doubled in size again, and his wingspan was as wide as Maya was tall, and he hit the mountain lion in mid-leap with talons extended and fire erupting from his jaws in a genuine inferno that would have been impossible just days before. But more than size had changed in the dragon, and Ember moved with the confidence of a true predator, now, and with ancient instincts that had lain dormant in his species for countless generations, and he drove the mountain lion back with calculated strikes. He was not trying to kill the sick animal, because it deserved mercy, not cruelty, but he was establishing absolute dominance and showing that he was the apex predator in this confrontation. Kate took her shot when she had a clean line of fire, and she ended the rabid cat's suffering quickly and humanely, and the mountain lion fell, and Ember landed beside Silvara with his scales gleaming like rubies in the afternoon sun. He was magnificent and no longer a pet or a companion, but a true dragon who was powerful and intelligent and proud of what he had become. Silvara whispered her dragon's name, and tears were streaming down her face, and she said he was finally himself, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, even though he was now too large to ride on her shoulder. Through their bond, she could feel understanding flowing between them, and the dragon was showing his partner that he was still hers and still bonded, but also finally and fully himself, for the first time in his life. Silvara said that Earth had not just woken Ember up, but had reminded him what dragons were meant to be and what they all were meant to be before they made everything safe and comfortable and easy. That night, Professor Vintar called an emergency meeting, and he announced that he had been in communication with the Academy Council and their expedition. Reports had caused quite a stir among the leadership. The professor said the council was concerned, and when Maya asked what they were concerned about, he explained that they feared exposure to death worlds might fundamentally alter non-human psychology, and that it might be dangerous to established social structures. He said the council had ordered them to return early and had suggested that Earth be placed off limits for all future educational expeditions, and the room erupted in protest from every student. Kesh declared that this was absurd because the trip had been the most valuable learning experience of their entire lives. Lyra added that they could not just pretend death worlds did not exist, or that what they had learned here was not important for their development. Silvara stood with Ember perched beside her because he was now too large to ride on her shoulder, and she said with respect to the professor that the council was afraid, and they were afraid, that if other people saw what this group had seen and experienced what they had experienced, then those people would start asking questions about why their civilizations had become so stagnant. The return to the Galactic Academy was nothing like the departure had been, and the students who had left Earth were not the same ones who returned, and it showed in everything they did, from the way they walked to the way they spoke to others and the confidence they now carried in their movements. Silvara called an assembly, which was something rarely done by students, but her family's ancient prestige and reputation gave her the authority to demand attention from the entire academy, and the auditorium filled with curious observers, including students and faculty, and even representatives from several species' homeworlds who wanted to know what had happened. Maya stood backstage feeling nervous and anxious because she had agreed to speak, but facing hundreds of beings who saw her as a monster was terrifying. Even after everything that had happened on Earth, Silvara was adjusting the collar of Maya's formal uniform, and she said quietly that Maya was not a monster, and she told her that she was what they all should aspire to become. Maya asked what that was, and Silvara smiled and said the answer was simple, and it was being unafraid of challenges and unafraid of growth, and she asked if Maya was ready. The elf woman took the stage first and moved with the grace that her people were famous for throughout the galaxy. But there was something new in her bearing now, and it was a strength and confidence that had not been there before the trip to Earth. Silvara began by addressing the honored guests, and she said they had returned from Earth 3 days ago, and the council had declared their expedition a failure, and had moved to classify all death worlds as unsuitable for educational purposes, and she said clearly that the council was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the audience like waves, and people whispered to each other, wondering what she meant. Silvara continued and said they had gone to Earth expecting to see a world of horrors, and yes, they had seen danger, including weather that could kill them and predators that saw them as prey, and even other humans who had tried to harm them for profit. She paused for effect and then said that they had also seen something infinitely more valuable than safety, and they had seen what life becomes when it is truly tested by adversity. Images from Earth appeared on screens around the auditorium, showing the storms and the forests, and the wildlife and the students facing each challenge and overcoming their fears. Silvara said that on Earth she had been forced to be brave not because she wanted to be, but because the alternative was failure or injury or death, and in being brave she discovered she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined possible. She gestured to Ember, who spread his wings, and they now spanned nearly 3 meters, and he was magnificent and powerful, and the audience gasped at seeing a dragon that large, because most dragons never grew beyond the size of a cat. Silvara said her partner, and her dragon had been awakened by Earth, and he had remembered what his species was, before elves had made them safe and small and decorative, and she looked directly at the council representatives. She said that Earth had not made them into monsters, but had made them real and authentic, and she said she had been cruel to Maya Torres because she thought the humans' world made her inferior. Silvara said she had mocked Maya's strength as barbarism and her resilience as primitiveness, and she admitted she had been completely wrong, and Maya Torres was not a monster from a death world, but was what they all could be if they were brave enough to embrace challenge instead of running from it. Then she gestured for Maya to join her on stage. And Maya walked out with her heart pounding because hundreds of eyes fixed on her. And most were uncertain and some were hostile, and a few were curious. Maya said she was not good at speeches, so she would make it simple and direct. And Earth was dangerous, and that was true. And living there required strength and vigilance and courage, and that was also true. She took a breath and said that what everyone needed to understand was that humans were not special because they were strong, but because they chose to be strong together as one unified species. She pulled up images of human history showing the climate wars and the unification and the great building projects that had saved their world from destruction. Maya said that humanity had faced extinction and they could have torn themselves apart, fighting over resources and territory, but instead, they decided that protecting each other was more important than individual safety. She said they decided that growth was worth the risk. And she gestured to the students from her class who were now standing in solidarity with her. Maya said these students had learned that lesson on Earth, and they learned that real growth required real challenges. And without danger, there could be no courage. And without struggle, there could be no strength. Professor Vintar floated forward on his platform and joined them on stage. And he said the council had expressed concerns that Death World exposure might destabilize established civilizations, and he believed they were correct to be concerned but wrong to be afraid. The elderly scholar's words carried weight because of his reputation, and he said he had studied galactic history for 3 centuries, and he had seen a pattern emerging. He explained that civilizations which eliminated all challenge eventually eliminated all progress, and they became beautiful and cultured, and utterly static. And they stopped dreaming of what they could become because they were too busy preserving what they already were. Professor Vintar turned to address the council directly, and he said that Earth and worlds like it were not threats to civilization, but were opportunities, and they were opportunities to remember what had been forgotten in all the comfort and safety. He said they were opportunities to grow beyond current limitations. The auditorium erupted in debate, with some calling for restrictions and others calling for exploration. And Maya noticed something important, which was that the students were speaking up and sharing their experiences and refusing to be silenced by authority. Lyra projected her voice through her tank's speakers and said that on her world they had eliminated every challenge, and their birth rates were plummeting because young people saw no purpose and no struggle to overcome. And maybe they needed danger, and maybe they needed purpose. Kesh added his voice and said Earth had taught him that beauty and danger could coexist, and that maybe true beauty actually required an edge of risk to make it meaningful. The debate raged for hours with passionate arguments on both sides, and finally, the council called for a recess so they could deliberate in private about what to do. Silvara found Maya outside the auditorium, watching ships come and go from the Academy's docking ports, and Ember lay between them with his large form warming them both against the cold of space. The elf woman said that whatever the council decided, this would not end here, and they had shown everyone something that could not be unseen or forgotten. Maya asked what that was, and Silvara said they had been calling themselves civilized, while humans were calling themselves human, and that maybe being human was actually better than being civilized. Maya smiled and said she thought civilization and humanity could coexist together. Silver said then Maya should teach them how to be both and teach them how to keep their cultures and their grace while reclaiming their courage. And she asked Maya to be their guide. The council returned with their decision after several hours, and they announced that Earth would remain open for educational expeditions, but with expanded safety protocols, and more importantly, they announced the creation of the Death World Cultural Exchange Program. The program was designed to help Garden Worlders understand and learn from high-gravity and high-danger worlds, and it would facilitate exchange. And Growth Maya was asked to serve as one of the program's first ambassadors, and she accepted without hesitation. Over the following months, everything changed in ways both large and small, and students who had been to Earth returned as advocates, and they shared their experiences with anyone who would listen. Silvara became a passionate spokesperson for cross-world understanding, and Ember served as living proof that sometimes challenge unlocks potential, that safety smothers, and the two became inseparable. The human from a death world and the elf, who learned to embrace danger, were united by their shared experience and by a growing friendship that deepened with each passing day. Other species began requesting their own Death World expeditions, and not all of them succeeded because some students could not handle the challenges they faced, but those who did succeed returned, transformed, and they carried with them lessons about courage and resilience, and the value of protecting each other. Even when it was dangerous to do so, humans slowly became, not outcasts but teachers, and Earth became not a nightmare but a classroom where important lessons were taught. Maya Torres, who had once been mocked as a monster, became a bridge between worlds, and she was proof that strength tempered with compassion was not barbarism but the highest form of civilization. She stood in the Academy's observation deck months later with Silvara beside her, and they watched Earth rotating peacefully in the viewport below them. Silvara asked if Maya ever regretted coming to the Academy and enduring all the mockery and cruelty she had faced. Maya thought about it, and she remembered the loneliness of those first months and the pain of being called a monster. But she also thought about what had come after, including friendships forged in crisis and respect earned through courage, and a galaxy slowly learning that different did not mean wrong.